standard of living, and in particular to their access to food security and water security. In this context as well, experts have been saying that unless we act now, in just 2 years, 2/3 of the world population may face safe water shortages. It will affect billions of us, and predominantly women and girls in the global south, who continue to walk miles to fetch water, exposing themselves to the risk of violence. We know that climate-induced losses and damages dramatically multiply the social crisis. That is a given, especially in society that are already struggling with pre-existing inequalities and multiple injustices. The impact of climate disaster particularly threatens women's rights, as we know that over 80% of people currently displaced by climate-related events are women and girls, according to the Women Gender Constituency of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Recently, at COP27, a senator from Pakistan, a woman senator who is the Minister of Climate Change, was one of the prominent advocates which led to the successful establishment of a loss and damage fund to support poorer countries who are greatly affected by climate change. However, despite this leadership, women continue to be underrepresented in decision-making positions on climate. For example, women accounted for less than 54% of country negotiating teams, and only 7 out of 110 heads of state present at COP27 were women. Even if women and girls continue to constitute the largest proportion among the affected population by climate change, women are not essentially vulnerable, nor they can be attributed distinct property of vulnerabilities. Vulnerability is constructed socially, economically, culturally, through distribution of power, wealth, and resources. The CEDAW Committee has recognized in its concluding observation on state parties, and many of you are represented in this room today, and through its General Recommendation 37, as was alluded to by the Chair, that state parties and other stakeholders have obligations under the Convention to take steps to address the gender-related dimension of disasters and climate change through the adoption of targeted country-specific legislation, and this is where your role is prominently, policies, strategy, budgets, and other measures, hence your role as parliamentarian. Gender-based violence also was alluded to this morning on the cyber scheme, but it is also very much exacerbated in situations of crisis and disasters. The recent pandemic unfortunately illustrated this problem. In addition, the limited participation of women in politics and decision-making processes add to the disadvantage of women when they are faced with disaster and climate change. And these disadvantages and obstacles also prevent women from being able to actively contribute to decision-making and to the development of adapted strategy, gender-responsive measures, and action at the national and local levels related to climate change mitigation and adaptation, and disaster risk reduction, reconstruction, and recovery efforts. Let us not forget how much traditional knowledge and what women hold as a knowledge is key sometimes to handling the crisis, and we are never ever taking care of asking them about their own knowledge. The disadvantages that women suffer from are exacerbating because we always view women as victims or inherently vulnerable, rather than rights holders with the right to be consulted, participate, and influence decisions and actions impacting their lives, as well as key actors with critical contribution to their society, economy, and environment. Gender equality and women's participation and leadership have been placed as areas of vital importance in global development frameworks and agreement. The commitment on women's empowerment and gender equality are grounded in CEDAW, and IPU is a key partner in that regard, as we have jointly embarked on the development of a new general recommendation on the equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making systems. It is the best way to mark the 40th anniversary of the CEDAW Committee. In conclusion, the rollout of effective, equitable and sustainable policies addressing climate change with a view to reducing insecurities and social crises requires placing the reduction of existing gender inequalities and women's empowerment at the center of the analysis and action undertaken, in particular through the full representation of women and girls at all levels of decision making. The Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and in particular SDG 1, 2, 5, 6, 13, and 16 provide us with an opportunity to make a positive difference in the life of the next generations. Your role as parliamentarian is key to this process. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Haider, for this very informative presentation. And as you rightly said, we need more women in decision-making positions so that we can really see the change. I now give the floor to Ms. Triggs to share with us how the UNHCR ensure that measures to prevent, mitigate, and address the efforts of crisis are all gender responsive and promote the rights of women and girls and their empowerment, including the rights of displaced women and girls.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much indeed for giving us at the United Nations Refugee Agency an opportunity to be part of this IPU conference. And I say that because we know that what we need is the influence and the understanding of members of parliaments who can bring an effective advocacy voice into government in order to achieve both the legislative changes and the policy changes if we are to protect women who are so seriously affected by climate change. This is a very wide-ranging topic, if I may say so. Climate, gender inequality, and of course the huge question of peace and security. But the interaction of each of these elements is absolutely vital if we are to respond to the concerns that we have in particular at the United Nations Refugee Agency. Because you might say, well, why is a refugee agency of the United Nations concerned with climate change or concerned with water? Of course, you all know that we're very much concerned with peace, but I thought I'd begin by explaining the context, why it is that the UN Refugee Agency is so concerned about climate and limited access to water resources. And the reason lies in the mounting and unprecedented numbers of displaced people globally. And in the last year, the High Commissioner for Refugees has reported that we have 103 million people displaced either within their own country or across national boundaries seeking international protection as refugees. In the more than 70-year history of the United Nations Refugee Agency, we have never had numbers of this huge dimension. And in the last year, we've had 14 emergencies, 26 of them new. And now you'll all be, of course, aware of the emergencies with the Ukrainian war, with the drought in Somalia, with the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. But there are many, many other emergencies around the world, and we need to keep an eye on those emergencies because it is conflict that is the main driver of displacement. All over the world, we have conflicts, either a war as in Ukraine, or we have conflict at much smaller levels, but nonetheless devastating in many parts of Africa. And I'm thinking of Mozambique, of the Sahel, and recently Somalia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and others. But what is perhaps the newer element that we are starting to talk about is that climate is having an enormous impact on the movement of peoples due to conflict. Because conflict is what might be called a vulnerability multiplier. And I thought perhaps, if I may, I would give you an example of what I mean. If we take, it's one, and one could look at 20 or 40 examples, but one that perhaps you'll be aware of is the recent conflict in Cameroon, where the grasslands for herds has declined significantly. So the herds people are moving into traditional agricultural areas or into fishing areas in the Great Lakes area and in the river that separates Chad from Cameroon. And that has led to conflict between peoples that have always existed peacefully. But now a conflict has erupted, and over the space of just a week, a few months ago, 30,000 people fled from Cameroon into Chad, placing yet another responsibility burden on the people of Chad to care for these displaced people. So my point is that as we see climate change having an impact on access to water, on access to arable land, or onto land where herds can be fed, we are seeing more conflict and more displacement. But as my colleague, Ms. Haider from CEDAW has said, one of the shocking facts when we talk about people displaced is that in many conflicts, 80% of people displaced are women and children. But another fact, which again illustrates the interoperability of this, the interconnectedness of the world in which we live in, is that 40% of the world's refugees are hosted in countries which are climate vulnerable. And they're also hosted in countries which are the poorest or low or middle income countries. So we have an interrelationship of factors which are having an enormous impact. As Ms. Haider has also pointed out quite accurately, when we have conflict and when we have displacement reflecting lack of access to water resources or as a consequence of climate, we see that the crisis affects women disproportionately. And it's a shocking fact that over 14 times the number of women and children are killed by climate-fueled disasters or conflict. So in every context, we see women and children being the greatest sufferers from our inability to control conflict and our inability to manage climate impacts. We see in some areas girls excluded from school in unprecedented numbers. And in the Horn of Africa, for example, which is now in its 6th year of drought, 9 million livestock have been killed, but 15 million children are out of school. We see a growth in child marriage, of intimate partner violence. We have overcrowded communal living conditions with gender-based violence spiking in areas. The point has been made, and we need to make it as well for refugee women and women displaced. And that is that women are key agents of change. And one of the greatest wastes of human resources is that we do not listen to those women's voices. They need economic empowerment and engagement at the table if they are to reduce the risks and to use the experience and skills that they have to both act proactively to ensure self-reliance and resilience in the face of climate change and water scarcity, but also to be able to respond. Now, many of you will be aware we have many legal instruments. We have all sorts of law created in the 20th century. The challenge for us in the 21st century is to give effect to those conventions, whether it's the Organization of African Unities Convention, the Cartagena Declaration for the Americas, or the global, of course, agreement on the status of refugees. But importantly, of course, to give effect to the Global Compact on Refugees, which is an aspirational, non-legal document which asks for the equitable sharing of responsibilities to assist those countries that are supporting women and children, often poor, low to middle income countries that we all need to take responsibility and to share. Of course, we are very good within the UN system, perhaps from my own agency, at describing the problem. We have the data to demonstrate it, but perhaps we're not always so good at finding solutions. And within the UN Refugee Agency, we are trying to work harder now on finding concrete solutions. And one of them is through climate finance. That is to use the financial resources available globally in order to support host countries that are particularly climate vulnerable and that host the most refugees, but also to ensure that women have access to financing. It's a very sad fact that funding is often not available to poorer women, to local actors, to local communities, for all sorts of very technical, legal, and procedural reasons. And one thing we are calling for is new approaches to scaling up climate financing and to ensuring that financing is available on a non-discriminatory basis to ensure that women at local levels can be more influential. So can I conclude, because I know time is short for each of us, can I conclude by asking that we all now stand up in the 21st century to try to give effect to implement in concrete ways the laws that we have in place, the policies that we have in place, and all the goodwill that exists to give effect to the mounting numbers of people displaced because of conflict and climate-related issues. And can I say we cannot keep doing the same things. This is the century for us to be looking at new initiatives to try to deal with the numbers that we're working with and to ensure that women are properly represented and able to use their agency to be effective. So thank you very much, and I very much look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs, for this very important contribution. And actually, the numbers are a bit heartbreaking, number of refugees and how women and children are very affected by this. We hope things can change very soon. Thank you. I would now like to turn to Madam Speaker, Nunu Kumba. Could you inform us on the historic drought situation in the Horn of Africa, where millions of people are currently food insecure and leaving their homes in search of food and water, and how this disaster can be addressed in a way that builds sustainable peace, water governance, and climate action with a strong gender perspective. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, colleagues of the panel, honorable speakers, members of the heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My presentation will focus on the historic drought in the Horn of Africa. And I'm very honored to be part of these panel discussions. The Horn of Africa is in the grip of a worsening drought. Tens of millions of people are in jeopardy, facing an uncertain future. Lives and livelihood across the region have been disrupted, and many will not recover soon. With increased climatic variability, many areas are now facing their fifth consecutive failed rains, and a sixth failed rainy season is predicted in 2023. In Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, drought conditions exacerbated by existing instability and conflict have left 11 million people food insecure, causing deaths of over 250,000 people, including 130,000 children. This has resulted in increased humanitarian needs, severe water scarcity, dying livestock, as stated earlier by my colleague, and inflation and disease outbreaks. When an alarm was raised about famine in early 2017, the collective response by national and international partners, the European Union, the United Nations, and the World Bank, demonstrated a clear commitment to never again let a famine unfold in Somalia. The massive scale-up of life-saving assistance throughout the country by local communities, civil society, youth groups, diaspora, private sector, local and national authorities, and international partners reflected a level of solidarity and efficiency in the national international aid system to collectively prevent famine in Somalia. I would also like to note that the climate change impacts continue to disproportionately affect women and girls as a result of displacement, food insecurity, and especially those living in protracted conflict areas. Rising poverty and food insecurity, often associated with loss of livelihood, can heighten intimate partner sexual and gender-based violence. It is not a secret that some families have married off their girl children as a coping survival strategy. These are serious issues that have been raised at the international level by prominent personalities such as Michelle Bachelet, twice former president of Chile, and former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights from 2018 to 2022. Today, I want to focus on South Sudan, my country, given the urgency of the situation there. Compared to other countries in the Horn of Africa, South Sudan is facing recorded breaking rains and floods. For the fourth consecutive years, and the threat of worse to come as climate change accelerates. 2/3 of the country is currently experiencing flooding, and over 1 million have been directly affected, and affected as water swept away homes and livestock, forcing thousands to flee and worsening as already their food emergency. At the recent International Women Conference on Transformational Leadership in Juba, South Sudan, climate change and its nexus with advancing gender equality was high on the agenda. One of the key messages focused on the need for the government prioritization of social protection system and access to basic social services such as water and sanitation, health care, education, and renewable energy sources as a foundation to building women's resilience to crises, including those caused by climate change, natural disasters, and conflict. Such services must consider the diverse and special needs of women and girls with disabilities, the internally displaced and migrant women, and those living in rural areas. To save lives and to stop communities from collapsing, we must act now. Today, there must be leadership from the international community. Even as we grapple with the tragic event in Ukraine and the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, we need to dig deeper in response to the unfolding crisis in the Horn of Africa. The Kampala Ministerial Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change, signed by 15 African member states in July 2022, is one of the most significant framework that demonstrates a whole of government approach, but also the informed and proactive outlook of the government in the region. However, a regional crisis of this magnitude requires a more coordinated and ambitious regional response, given the cross-border movements in search for pasture, water, and humanitarian services. Today's event is an opportunity to propose concrete actions and measures to assist and protect drought and flood-affected communities at all levels. We have excellent lessons to learn from countries such as India, which harvested its water from the annual flooding of river ganges and later uses it to irrigate rice, which is sold to other countries in the world, including the Horn of Africa. South Sudan has been proactive in developing its South Sudan National Water Policy, 2007, South Sudan National Environment Policy, 2015, Adaptation Plan of Action and a Strategy that was launched on 12 November 2015, though the country's technical assessment on vulnerability, hazards, and priority sector is limited. South Sudan remains committed to all SDGs, in this case SDG 13, with the theme of leaving no one behind. We are strongly committed to prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls due to climate change impacts, including recognizing that the violence against women and girls across diversity are intrinsically linked. South Sudan ascended to 4 international conventions, adopting them into law on 24 February 2023. The laws cover civil, political, and economic rights of the people of South Sudan, and including the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the Rights of Women in Africa, commonly known as the Maputo Protocol. and Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. All these indicate the commitment of the government to address issues of global concerns. I would like to urge all governments on the Horn of Africa, as well as the international community, to commit to putting women and girls at the center of decision-making on climate, environmental, and disaster risk policies and programs. Countries, parliaments must put mechanisms in place to ensure that women have appropriate information on disaster preparedness and providing alternative means of livelihood if they are faced with a climate crisis. Mitigation will be sustainable compared to response, which is no longer value for money. Time has come for no more debates on these issues, and it is time to act now. Therefore, due to frequent droughts experienced in the respective countries, and especially in the Horn of Africa, we need to, as government, to have programs which prioritize and promote harvesting and retention of water for different uses. This will be implemented through the community-based watershed management with a focus on maintaining the quality and the quantity of water. 2, countries and parliaments have to exercise zero tolerance to perpetrators of sexual and gender-based violence and must take urgent steps to respect and protect women and girls that are violated, especially as victims of circumstances. 3, countries or parliaments have to ensure that there is a full and equal participation and leadership of women leadership of women on climate change issues. Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with collective commitment and a strong political will as governments and parliaments, in line with all the national and international legal framework in place, we can change the lives of our people, especially women and girls in the Horn of Africa and beyond, who are affected in these areas. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your first-hand account on the worrying situation facing your country and your region. And I also thank you for the solutions that you have proposed. I announce that the list of speakers is closed. We have a number of speakers who would like to speak, so we have closed the list by now. I'm pleased to give the floor to Mr. Putu on how Indonesia is currently coping with and mitigating the impacts of climate change, including in association with those who are most affected by these impacts. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is an honor for me, and also I'm very blessed to be here as one of the panel for this very important session of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Putu Supadma Rudana. I'm a member of Indonesian Parliament, and my constituency is in Bali, the home of 144th IPU last year. I'm also in Commission 6, dealing with trade investment and also state-owned companies. And then now I'm the vice chair of the Committee for Inter-Parliamentary Cooperation. Before, we have heard about the challenges and also the threats regarding insecurity and crisis of water, climate, and also peace. And then I think at this time, I would like to share the experience, the wisdom, and hopefully, of course, comparing the challenges, the experience of Indonesia and the wisdom of probably there's a local wisdom in Bali, because we're very lucky that we blessed with all resources that we have, not only the natural beauty, but we have water supplies from the lake, and also luckily we are very green, and then we have great river, and then actually is very sustainable because we don't need a nuclear reactor or power to bring the water from the mountain to the sea. So I think that's one great information of wisdom maybe I can share. Climate crisis overly affects vulnerable population, including women and children. Of course, during the 145th IPU Assembly last year in Kigali, we have heard how the crisis, including water insecurity, highly amplifies the existing gender inequalities. We have also heard in the UN parliamentary hearing held just a few weeks ago on how essential water and sanitation on human life. However, as important resources with the potential to drive economic development, ineffective resource management often stands in the way. I believe that engaging and empowering women and girls' participation are the key to ensure resilience and sustainability to this sector. Since 2017, Indonesia has implemented the water safety plans to ensure the quality on drinking water and protect communities from contamination. In 2021, we reached a key milestone through enacting the National Roadmap of WSP, Water Safety Plans, for 2021 to 2025, which includes implementation of 190 districts and municipalities by 2024. The provision also includes measures to address gender discrimination and inequalities in water and sanitation. I would like to highlight the main challenges in curbing water security gap between rural and urban area. As of 2020, only 82% of households in rural Indonesia have access to basic water services, while almost 95% of urban households enjoy those services. To tackle this, Indonesia has launched a community-based rural water supply and sanitary program since, of course, 2007. It is a bottom-up participatory driven program which ensure all members of community have equal access to drinking water. It's called PAM CIMAS. It's one of the biggest water supply programs in the world in terms of public participation. As of 2022, almost 22 million people in 32,000 villages throughout Indonesia have PAM CIMAS access. Gender equality is one of the main principles of this PAM CIMAS program by providing equal opportunities for women and men to make decisions, participate actively, and be responsible for the management of water supply facilities. Moreover, our commitments in mainstreaming gender into the climate change are also apparent through the gender-responsive climate budgeting within Indonesia's state budget. Our existing system includes the synchronization of budget planning through Krishna application that facilitate the process of climate budget taking, and the reward system for implementing gender-responsive planning and budgeting known as the Anugerah Parahita Eka Praya Awards. In addition to our experience in Indonesia, I would like also to highlight about Bali experience and wisdom. As parliamentarians from Bali, I would also like to share how Balinese people hold nature in high respect and consider local wisdom in preserving nature, especially water. Of course, we have one Balinese philosophy called Trihita Karana. It's the harmony between the relationship between human and human, human and nature, and human to our creator. And then this philosophy is very important to Bali, and it's not really directed. People has an obligation to actually uh, uh, do the thing with this philosophy. Trihita is interpreted as a concept that teaches human to live side by side. The aim is to create harmony in life, not only, of course, with fellow human beings, but also with God and our nature or environment. The three harmonious relationship are believed to bring happiness, harmony, and prosperity in life. Our people uphold the philosophy in life, of course, like I mentioned earlier. That is why the government policy in Bali is also designed according to this philosophy. Of course, how to create the province of Bali that is of high quality, safe, comfortable, productive, self-identified, competitive, and also environmentally friendly and sustainable as a center for the development of culture-based tourism, agriculture, and industry. Further, Balinese manage water as tirta. Tirta meaning that as a holy water concept. It means that all natural spring water is a sacred area that should be protected, and always we have to pray on the sacred area. Both men and women have similar obligation and responsibility to protect and preserve the tirta or holy water. Tirta is an integral part of Balinese society. The definition of holy water refers to water that is taken from the water source. And then it is given, of course, our ceremony, spiritual ceremony. Then it is revered as tirta. Water is something that is very much needed in the life of course, Balinese people. So in Bali, we treat water as very important matter, and of course, people will have to take care the source of water. And actually, there's a lot of temple in the source of water that created by Balinese. Considering this, I am very delighted to inform you as well that Indonesia next year in 2024 in Bali, on 18 and 24th of May 2024, Bali will hold World Water Forum of 2024. And I think this is a great moment also to invite everybody to visit Bali again, to also experience what I just mentioned earlier regarding the wisdom that I think it's been there for long generation that Bali people actually been blessed with. Again, I believe that resilience and sustainability of water resource management and climate protection will be strengthened by, of course, women inclusion and empowerment. And then the role of women and girls, of course, is very important and vital to, like I mentioned earlier, to preserve, to protect, and also hopefully to the future to make water sustainable to our future generation. To this end, I also encourage Parliament to engage with women's group and civil society organization who are at the front lines of this work as important allies in implementing gender responsive policies. And I thank you for the time, and of course, hopefully that I can give information, not only the experience of Indonesia, but also the wisdom. And of course, we also have the challenge now, even though we are blessed with all resources in Indonesia and Bali, but we have the challenges that to manage all the resources is not that easy. Sometimes it's very difficult how to manage, but I think with our work together, and hopefully we can work hand by hand, we can solve this matter, how to tackle, of course, the water insecurity, the climate problem, and also to hopefully in the future to keep peace more sustainable. And I think that's the way to go forward. I think peace is very important. As you know, also Bali is well known for the island of peace, and Indonesia also is well known for the implementation of harmony in the world. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Puto, for this very informative statement about Indonesia and the issue of climate and water scarcity. We would now like to hear from Ms. Kenner-Nilal about local and national initiatives where grassroots women's groups are consulted and play an active role in prevention and peace building from a feminist perspective. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, MPs, ladies and gentlemen, let me pay tribute to the people of Bahrain by starting with a quote of the late Sheikha Lulua Al Khalifa, our peace woman of Bahrain, who passed away in 2016. And before that, she wrote the following: "Now that I am in my 70s, I find in serving women and children the motives that keep me fit and energetic. It was my secret formula that kept me going." My organization, Peace Women Across the World, edited the 1,000 nominations for Peace Women for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. And the late Sheikha Lulua Al Khalifa from Bahrain is one of them. Actually, I invite you to do similar initiatives as this book, in which we portray the 1,000 women of all the world. You can do similar initiatives and nominate the women, portray the women who now are peace builders in your area, in your region, in your continent. I also am happy to extend to you the greetings from our board member of Peace Women Across the Globe, Sima Samar, former Minister of Women's Affairs of Afghanistan from 2001 to 2003, and founder afterwards of the Gavarshad University in Kabul. She wrote to me yesterday and allows me to quote: "The university, the Gavarshad University in Kabul, is working under a very difficult condition. It will be only for the boys. The female student will study online, but as you know, it is so difficult because of poverty. Girls cannot afford to pay the fee. In general, the situation is not good, but we will not give up and try to find ways to continue educate the Afghan youth." End of quote of Sima Samar, whom many of you may know. A cornerstone, and please, yes, thank you for the first slide. A cornerstone of our work as civil society, as women's feminist Pacific group, is the UN Security Council Resolution 13.5. You all know it. I will not dwell on that for reasons of time, but why is this resolution so important? And as a lawyer, as an attorney myself, I invite you to read it again and again, because its content is simply excellent, and I urge you to implement it as we are trying to do in our work. Next slide, please. Yes. What we are striving for, the SDGs have been mentioned before, and actually this is one of the aims, also SDG 16, peaceful societies and access to justice for all. Access to justice for all. As an attorney, I cannot stress this enough. Third slide, please. Peace women across the globe have illustrated the importance of including women and youth in peace processes in a recent publication. You'll find it in English and Spanish on the basis of programs we fund in Colombia, Nepal, and the Philippines. These are ongoing programs. And the strength of those three programs lie also in interconnecting the grassroots women and the experts and also lawmakers from the three countries, Colombia, Nepal, and the Philippines, with the aim that women's organizations and peace activists find a conflict continuum. In this publication, you'll find a useful guide for prevention, for pre-conflict, during war, and post-war reconstruction. This program will continue. I invite you to look at it on our website, which is www.1000peacewomen.org. Allow me now to focus a little bit on the Colombian project, as Latin America and Colombia has not been mentioned in this panel. In Colombia, and you remember that 2016, the Colombian peace agreement was concluding one of the longest wars in the world that had ended after more than 50 years, having left at least 450,000 people killed, 120,000 forcibly disappeared, 30,000 documented cases of sexualized violence. The Colombian peace agreement is the first peace agreement in the world that included a gender focus. The movement Ruta Pacífica de las Mujeres and the civil society organization Comunitar, Corporación de Mujeres Ecofeministas, our two partner organizations in Cauca, the south of Colombia, played a leading role for the first integration of a gender approach into the peace agreement. For example, it refers explicitly to women's rights to own land. And as we know, a title to land is often the only possibility to have access to water. And it states that there will be no amnesty for crimes of sexual violence. That paved the way for the gender working group of the Truth Commission. You can look at the Commission's website under comisiondelaverdad.co. The Colombian peace agreement was already a model for the inclusion of marginalized communities and women. The fact that the experiences of women and LGBTIQ+ people were included in the peace negotiations is also owing to the active women's grassroots and feminist movements. Thanks to them, the Commission's final report, which was rendered last June, includes the 644-page volume, My Body is the Truth, which pays tribute to the experiences of 10,864 women who were multiply affected by the conflict. The volume, I will go on. As a feminist on the Commission, the gender coordinator of the Colombian Truth Commission said, I quote, Salome Gomez Corrales, as a feminist on the Commission, it was a great opportunity to explain to the whole society how patriarchy, racism, and discrimination fostered, justified, and legitimized violence against women and LGBTIQ+ people. It was her team that convinced the Commission to dedicate a separate chapter to women and LGBTIQ people in the final report. Without the voices of women, the testimonies of those over 10,000 women, it would not have been possible to clarify what happened in the decade-long Colombian conflict. The newly elected left progressive government in Colombia has promised to implement the Commission's recommendations and is holding consultations with representatives of the women's movement to create a national action plan to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1325. The armed conflict may officially be over, but women continue to be exposed to violence and to a militarized understanding of security. Here are some of the most important recommendations, and I will conclude on this. Please, the last slide. A new vision of security should be created that promotes peace as a public good with people at the center. A new Ministry of Peace and Reconciliation will be responsible for the implementation of the peace process and contribute to reconciliation in general. I look forward to the compliments by the delegates from Colombia and Latin America, who will know much more than me about the situation in Colombia. And I invite you to connect with my organization, Peace Women Across the Globe, within these Feminists Connecting for Peace. We hold webinars. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for the enlightening information, Ms. Kenner-Nellen. And dear colleagues, the floor is yours now to share your thoughts and good practices. We have 30 delegations registered so far, and we have already closed the floor for receiving contributions. So we'll start with. We'll start with Kuwait. And please try to limit your contribution to 2 minutes so that we can be able to accommodate all the delegations that have registered their names. 2 minutes, please. Kuwait. Okay. So, Niger. Do we have Niger? No? Cyprus. Next is Cyprus.
Hello, colleagues. First, I would like to thank the panel for the interesting introduction, and particularly our colleague from Indonesia. I wish everybody had this approach to this water and the holiness of water. And yes, the world is in crisis, and we've seen this through the pandemic. And we have seen that the crises are never gender neutral. Today, more than ever before, underrepresentation of women in response to crisis and in resilience building is calling for increased women participation and leadership in decision-making process for sound results, leaving no one behind. Water crisis is a health crisis. Climate change and global warming are intensifying water scarcity. While conflicts are the main cause of hunger in the world, changes in rainfall or temperatures and droughts affect water supply, agriculture, harvests, and livelihoods, thus causing severe rise in global hunger. Recent research confirms that water scarcity and other climate threats have a disproportionately negative effect on women and girls around the world. Moreover, they undermine national and regional peace and security as they lead to forced migration. We have seen, even in my country, a lot of refugees that they leave their countries because of economic problems and poverty. Nevertheless, a robust gender perspective, which would include mechanisms that guarantee women's equal participation and leadership in water governance, climate response, and peace processes, is yet not included in policies and national adaptation strategies. As women parliamentarians, we must engage in a process of evaluation as regards the gender footprint on water insecurity, climate change, and conflict, and demand that women are able to contribute in lawmaking and policymaking in these areas. We need to ensure that measures to prevent, mitigate, and address the effects of water insecurity, climate change, and conflict are all gender responsive and promote the empowerment and the rights of women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Syria. 2 minutes, please. Followed by Egypt.
Good afternoon. At the beginning, I would like to thank the Kingdom of Bahrain for their warm welcome. And given that our title is Women and Women Leadership in Dealing with Crises, we have to say that the Syrian women have a very important role in the Syrian society. And given that the Syrian government believed that women's role is very important in societies and on the economic, social, and political levels. Therefore, and in the conditions of the war and the earthquake, I would like to convey a message from the Syrian women of my country. It is high time for the Syrian people to live, for children to dream, and for young people to build their future. It is high time to eradicate discrimination between people. There are no one is better than anybody else, and no one can punish, impose an embargo, and impose or steal the wealth of people and occupy their territories. Every culture is rich given its civilization. In Syria, we didn't just hear about the war, we lived it. We didn't just hear about terrorism, we faced it. We didn't just hear about sanctions and wealth and stealing our wealth, but we had to buy our own oil, gas, and wheat. The reality should not remain the biggest victim. We lived the war, the embargo, and very recently the crisis of the earthquake. Women were present and they had experience to face insecurity, to face crises, instability, face scarcity and needs. It was able to guarantee its family and principles, relieve Syria from its sanctions.
شكرا للسيدة الرئيسة. شكرا
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for our panel for this very useful conversation, and thank you for the Kingdom of Bahrain for their welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, today there are a lot of challenges and crises that are intertwined economically and socially. They are producing consecutive crises that women and young children have to face. In fact, there are consecutive crises that led to a gas, energy crisis, as well as many conflicts, and the 2019 pandemic. And women and children have faced the biggest or have assumed the biggest brunt of these crises and conflicts. However, we need to look at them not just as victims, but as engines of change that have a lot of power. We saw their leadership in many places of the world. It is very important to say that the Kigali Declaration of the IPU confirmed that gender parity is very important to face pandemics, crises, and the environmental changes. It also confirmed that we need to take into consideration gender equality in parliaments, and that when women take a leadership role in government and parliaments, we see a lot of investment in social justice and in facing poverty. And when women participate in peace negotiations, we achieve more sustainable agreements. However, women only form 1/4 of parliamentarians and only 1/5 of ministers in government. Therefore, it is very important to empower women to face the crises and the conflicts, because they form 50% of the population. Gender equality is very important for sustainable development.
Followed by United Arab Emirates.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sorry, my mic it's not on my place. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, I want to express a point of view on the situation from Ukraine. In the constitutions of our countries, the functions of member of parliaments are often outlined in detail. These functions are very well known to us from the theory of state and law. However, in extreme conditions, members of parliament must do much more, regardless of their gender, age, position, or professional specialization. When Russia launched a large-scale unprovoked aggression against Ukraine, every male and women MP became a universal figure. Each of us is now an international diplomat, a volunteer, a psychologist, a driver who delivers humanitarian aid. Some of male colleagues take care of the children of Ukrainian refugees who are forced to flee from Russian bombs and tanks, and some of our female colleagues are involved to organizing the reconstruction of houses destroyed by Russia, or working with national security and intelligence bodies. Some colleagues, both men and women, are directly fighting with weapons on the battlefield. Both men and women in our parliament are equally risking their lives while performing their duties. Even we sit under the glass roof of our parliament building during the plenary session, we are not immune to the danger of the Russian missiles and drones attacking our country. What does this all mean? It means that the Ukrainian parliament has become a good role model for our society and for other nations. When gender does not affect rights, duties, professional specialization, or life risk for responsible people, each of us should be an example of kind of society we want to build. And we are doing just that. Thank you.
Thank you. United Arab Emirates, followed by Azerbaijan.
السيدات والسادة السلام عليكم.
Ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you. At the outset, I would like to thank the Bahraini Kingdom for hosting the 146th Assembly of the IPU. We think that parliaments need to empower women so that they can participate in the reform in society and play a bigger role in the mediation for official peaceful negotiations. We need to urge Parliament to promulgate a new legislation that guarantee the participation of women in peaceful processes. Now we will showcase the initiatives that we took in the UAE, the initiative for our Sheikha for forming women staff in military and peacekeeping operations. This program, that is a 9-week program, enables African and Arab women that participate in it to be provided with training in order to achieve strategic goals of the United Nations Security Council resolution. The UAE is given a very high importance for the subject or for the dossier of women, especially after the UAE gained the first regional place for gender equality for 2020. Furthermore, it guarantees to urge all nations to make sure that the women item is always included in international agenda, because women are important to achieve peace and security. Thank you.
Azerbaijan, followed by France.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, eminent participants, ladies and gentlemen. The role of women in solving problems related to insecurity and crisis is really high, and based on their potentials, they can change the world for the better. In 2020, my country, Azerbaijan, restored the justice.
Excuse me, can I ask you to come closer to the mic because we can't hear? Thank you.
In 2020, my country, Azerbaijan, restored justice, so we could deoccupy our lands, which were for 30 years under Armenian occupation. Now the war has ended. We are in the post-war period, which has many problems. First, I want to attract your attention to mine problems that we are suffering for 3 years, which left almost 300 victims, and the second is reintegration. For the first problem, I want to say that 30 years conflict brought genocide, culturicide, and enormous sufferings to the people of Azerbaijan. There are losses in the part of Armenia as well. But now we have turned the page of hatred. Now we want to build peace. And we believe that enforcing dialogue between the sides in this crisis situation is the best way out. We believe the parliamentarian can play their role in this process. Encouraging women participation in peace dialogue can bring new impetus and enable us to understand where we are and what we need to do. With special accent of women's role, we can smooth the way to peace deal, which is very critical for now. UN Resolution 1325 can be a next but very effective tool in enforcing the women activity. So I want to say that the situation can be can change for the better, but the dialogue is very important. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Azerbaijan, followed by France. France, followed by the Russian Federation.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. L'accord perdure dans le temps. Dans le cadre de l'UI, en recommandant par exemple l'adoption de législation en compte du rôle
will be covering our diplomacy in a synchronous of the efficacy of neopolitics. I greet the efforts of Madame Delphine Auque as the Secretary General of the Forum of the Delegation of Women's Rights and the credits of the exterior policies for the equality of men and women. And while our societies are facing more and more problems, and Europe and in Africa, it's urgent to increase the place of women in the decision-making processes. And I would like to conclude my intervention by remembering you that the Paris Agreement on the climate for 2015. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a Russian Federation, followed by Philippines.
Благодарю, госпожа председатель. Уважаемые коллеги, тема нашей встречи...
Today we're discussing a very important topic. The world is living in turbulent times, and Russia has been...
В уставе Организации Объединенных Наций против нашей страны введены несправедливые...
Charter, and Russia has been facing restrictions that are designed to suppress and undermine our sovereignty. This has had a negative effect on implementing the UN agenda and on promoting sustainable development. I strongly believe that when we face instability, it is up to women MPs to be constructive in cooperation efforts, in promoting dialogue in the interests of the people. Women have a keen feeling for life and the key values that we stand for. This is our mission, and I believe that the irreparable losses in the conflict in Ukraine, they are suffered by women in the Donbas region and in Russia's neighboring regions. They are the ones who live in the combat zone. They hope that women from around the world will support them. Whenever there are challenges in international dialogue, women MPs can always be efficient in finding common ground. Thank you for your attention.
Followed by South Africa.
Madam Chairperson, leadership can make or break a nation. And for leaders in parliament like us, there is much we can do to address the gender gap. We know this, but it is worth repeating. The number one thing we need to do is include women in all decision-making levels. When I go around our country, meeting people in the local government, I'm an elected senator in the Philippines, and that means I am elected nationwide. So I go around the country and I meet local government people. I always emphasize the importance of women's voices. Decisions made without their perspective is never good enough. On the budget, in the Philippines, our Magna Carta of Women law requires 5% of the total budget of government agencies are set aside for GAD, the GAD programs and activities. This is a good thing, but this session serves as a reminder for us to review how these budgets are used. How can we use these funds during times of crisis? Also in the Philippines, we have a Senate Committee on Sustainable Development Goals, Innovations, and Futures Thinking. It was my initiative to establish this committee. We are one of the few parliaments in the world that reviews policies and laws with a future thinking lens. To this end, I have been able to include futures thinking research, budget for public universities. They are tasked to conduct research precisely on topics that affect women, like food security, access to clean water, climate change, and more. The importance of studying these issues from a gender perspective cannot be overlooked. Also, both at the committee level and on the floor, my team seeks to look at all legislation from both a gender perspective and sustainability. Meanwhile, I will continue to listen intently to the debates. I will take home a wealth of information from the wonderful women who have participated here today and to our resource persons. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you. We have South Africa, followed by Thailand.
Madam Chairperson, today's debate reminds us that we need more women at the table to build more inclusive and equitable societies during these trying times. Research shows that societies prosper when more women participate as community leaders, workers, policymakers, and implementers. For example, during the pandemic, the consistent message has been that female leaders outperform their male counterparts in crisis response, particularly due to a compassionate approach. The UNDP UN Women COVID-19 Global Gender Tracker showed that governments with higher women's representation in parliaments adopted a higher number of gender-sensitive policy measures in response to the pandemic. This does suggest that the presence of more women in parliaments and the executive may positively contribute to more balanced, gender-sensitive, environmentally considerate policies. It is therefore important for us to break the cycles of underrepresentation, hunger, abuse, exploitation, and negligence by investing in and prioritizing women's and girl child's rights. It starts by empowering and educating our women and girls. UNESCO research shows that for every year of primary school a girl completes, her wages later in life go up by 20%. For every year of secondary school, by 25%. We must also ensure that no child sits in a classroom hungry by providing school meal programs. In South Africa, our national school program provides over 9 million learners with nutritious meals every day at school. The lack of legal protection in our countries continues to enable everything from gender-based violence to discrimination. As parliamentarians, our main task is to ensure that a comprehensive domestic legislative framework is accompanied by appropriate resources and awareness programs in place to not only end impunity, but to send a strong message that violence against women is not acceptable. In South Africa, we are committed to ridding our society of gender-based violence and femicide, which remain pervasive violations in our country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Thailand, followed by Mexico.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, women have an important role in decision-making in their household and cause. Many resources in our daily life, such as fresh water, firewood, food, are fallen onto women's shoulders to collect and cook for their family members' self-consumption. Moreover, collection of water for several miles away from home and carrying heavy of jerry cans containing water can lead to negative impacts on women's health in certain parts of the world. Not to mention the contaminated water that women and girls can get infected or transmitted of diseases. In relation to the above issue that many women and girls in African countries are facing, most of women and girls in Thailand have experienced differently. They face both drought and flood caused by climate change. This leads to sanitation and health issues, which disproportionately affected women and girls. To address the related water issues systematically and comprehensive, Thai Parliament has passed the Water Resources Act in 2018, which was deemed the first ever law that integrated all aspects of water management in Thailand. According to the Act, the Office of the National Water Resources serves as a national focal point on water resources management and strategic planning in case of both droughts and flood. A new department dedicated to climate change affairs is being established under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mexico, followed by Netherlands.
%68% less than men globally. We still are only 25% in parliament representation. We still have the worldwide numbers experience physical and sexual violence in our lifetime. But in the other hand, we have great examples, as France talking about the gender parity law, talking about Australia, about the workplace gender equality law. Ireland has talked about the Gender Recognition Act, the UK about the domestic abuse, New Zealand, the paid parental leave law, Germany, Spain, Turkey, for example, the Act of the Prevention and Elimination of Violence Against Women, Norway about
الان شما چجوری میتونید چک کنید که صدای من هست یا نه؟ الان ببینید میشنون صدای منو؟ شما صدای منو میشنوین الان توی گوشی؟ میشنوین صدای منو؟ نه؟ من اینو فعالش کردم. ببین صدای منم داره میاد. نگاه. صدای منو دارین؟ صدامو ندارین؟ کانالو عوض کنین. کانالو. هلو صدای منو دارین؟ صدای من هست؟ صدای منو دارین؟ ببینید مال من صدا الان دارین میشنوین؟ الان هلو میشنوین؟ خیلی خوب. این متنتونه. اب نداره حالا کلی بدونم.
Hello, I am a senator. My name is Petra. I am a senator from the Netherlands. Thank you very much to Bahrain for their warm welcome.
The country for being below sea level. In some parts, we're below 7 meters. Last year, in my home province, Limburg, which is known to be hilly, my mother, my sister, my nieces were under threat to being evacuated. And it made all of us realize in the Netherlands that the issue of climate crisis is not only an issue of countries far away, it's something we are all confronted with. So here, my dear friends, my dear colleagues, we have to ask ourselves the questions, how can we as parliamentarians, as senators, be good ancestors? What can we do to include the voices of everybody, of all genders, in all their diversity, into our policies? In Egypt, during the COP, the climate summit, less than 30% of the time was taken by female representatives.
یک دو سه. آره اینو باید انگلیش کنم چون این الان داره انگلیسی صحبت میکنه اینو میکنه فارسی به خاطر اینه. باش خیلی من بله.
To be on board, because feminist foreign policy will enable also us parliamentarians to be more inclusive. To conclude, one of the first vice prime minister in the Netherlands, female vice prime minister, once said, her name is Els Borst, she's one of the leaders of my social liberal party, she said, politics are too important to leave only to men. I would say climate justice is too important to only leave it to men, but we need them on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Canada, followed by Romania.
Thank you. Colleagues, I would like to begin by thanking the Forum for organizing such a timely discussion and the panelists for their insights. The nexus of climate change and water scarcity is devastating livelihoods, driving displacement, widening economic and gender inequalities, and undermining sustainable development. Of the 28 million people who are estimated to have been displaced in 2021, 23.7 million were displaced due to climate-related disasters. The United Nations reports that most of these displaced people were women and children. Climate change has significant impacts on the availability of fresh water, and limited access to water affects women's overall health. It also impacts agricultural production and the care of livestock, and the increase in the overall amount of labor that is expended to collect, store, and protect and distribute water. We have also seen that climate change impacts girls' educations, as girls are the first to drop out of school to help with chores at home. Despite being unduly affected by climate change and its effects, including on water scarcity, women's full participation in crisis response and resilience building remains limited. We need to have women at the decision-making table, and women's voices need to be amplified and heard. It is well documented that women's perspectives contribute to a broader understanding of causes and consequences of conflict and can strengthen the legitimacy of the peace processes. Evidence also suggests the involvement of women in crisis responses and resilience building contributes to sustainable peace. The gendered implication of water scarcity is a global challenge, and interparliamentary cooperation has a vital role to play in making meaningful improvements in women's representation in policy making and decision making as they relate to tackling climate change and its impacts. For example, we can, indeed we must, identify gender-sensitive strategies to respond to the environmental and humanitarian crisis caused by climate change.
Thank you. Romania.
Madam President, dear colleagues, I very much appreciate the choice of this subject on the agenda. There are so many examples around us of women leadership in conflict and post-conflict societies during economic crisis or in communities severely impacted by climate change. More than a year has passed since Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. My country has played and continues to play an important role in providing support to Ukraine and to the more than 3 million Ukrainian refugees who entered our territory. And I would like to mention in this context that the task of strategically coordinated Romania's national response to this refugees crisis, a response that involves emergency assistance as well as protection, inclusion, and social cohesion measures, was entrusted to a woman holding the position of state councillor in the Romanian government. I'm sure that each of us could give similar examples of women leading successful responses to crises of all kinds. If this is true, let us make these women leaders better known. Let us showcase their stories, their successes, and their hardships they have overcome. From a different perspective, the ongoing war in Ukraine has demonstrated again and again that women are not only victims during a conflict, they are also at the helm of the political, military, and humanitarian responses. I'm thinking of our colleagues from the Supreme Rada who have continued to perform their duties with courage and determination despite the atrocities surrounding them. I'm thinking of the brave Ukrainian women soldiers and the brave Ukrainian mothers protecting their children from the Russian army and threats. So let me express our full solidarity with the Ukrainian women and with all the women in conflict situations throughout the world.
Mozambique, followed by Ireland.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman, Your Excellencies. The climate events and the climate changes affect mostly women, demanding more leadership in view to find sustainable solutions to these challenges. As parliamentarians, we need to find holistic solutions which allow us to transform them into national policies which have an impact in fighting the violation of human rights of women, fighting against impunity, in promotion social justice, gender equity, and respect for dignity, women dignity. In Mozambique, our parliament has adopted legislation, namely the family law, another law about forced marriages, and these laws have been adopted in order to guarantee the respect for women. In my country, the majority of the population lives in rural areas, where girls and women dedicate most of their time developing family agriculture, traveling long distances in search of water and wood fuel for domestic consumption. The performance of these activities means that from an early age, women and girls have no access to formal education, no access to opportunities to self-sufficiency, which compromises their present as well as their future. In order to solve the difficulties of population to access water, particularly in rural areas, we have two presidential initiatives. One is to have more access to water, but also access to energy, in particular in rural areas. These two initiatives.
Morocco.
Salam alaikum. It is a huge honor to be here among all these amazing women. And of course, the men who chose to attend this discussion too today. Not as many as I would have liked, of course. More women in power is literally our only hope as a planet. And it will not happen without the good men in politics realizing this and why it is necessary. I believe it is only together we can smash the patriarchy and really save our planet from huge wipeout of people, our natural environment, biodiversity. It will be better for men as well as women, actually, much better. I am a leader of the Green Party in the Senate in Ireland. To the men in the room, look at your own daughter, sister, niece. Are you happy for her to be treated as a second-class citizen, not treated equally or fairly? If you are not, you need to help us. Call out bad behavior, call out oppression, step aside and let more women take the table. We are sick of sitting at the kitchen table. We need to be at all the other tables. As a single mother who has worked as a climate activist for 25 years and as a Green Party politician, it has not been easy to get this far in politics. For less than 3 years now, I am a senator. We are in serious trouble, but if we get more equality for women, I firmly believe, I'm convinced we will have a cleaner air, cleaner water, better quality food, happier and healthier children, and we can reverse biodiversity and climate emergency. My first week in the Shannon, me and two female colleagues of mine in the Senate introduced a bill that was passed, and it abolished the need to have planning permission to put up solar panels. A ridiculous rule in the first place. We, as a Green Party, convinced our coalition partners to give grants for photovoltaic solar panels, and now there is a solar revolution in our country. This summer, we are putting free solar panels on every school in Ireland. I do not fly in general because it is so stupid in a climate emergency to fly. But women who have freedom of speech must use and take every opportunity to speak for all those women who have no voice. We have 7 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Morocco, followed by Ghana.
Shukran.
Thank you, Mrs. President. Based on all the speakers, on what all the speakers says, women are the biggest victims of crises, wars, pandemics, climate catastrophes, and water scarcity. However, today, if we work together as female and male parliamentarians and as governments, we can turn these women from victims, transform them from victims to activists by participating in all decision-making processes, economic, political, cultural, environmental, water-related decisions, etc. We should include women in all decision-making processes so they don't remain victims. I would like to note here that the topic on the table that is adopted by the General Assembly is related to promoting peaceful coexistence and achieving comprehensive societies without any extremism. How can we achieve that if these societies don't adopt gender equality in texts, legislation, and in practice? If we weren't in societies that include those with special needs, if we don't live in societies where we receive and welcome the refugees who fled their origin countries looking for work, water, health, and education. It is true that this cannot be achieved in one government only, but this must be the strategic view of all governments and national and international institutions, because equality in these days is not a claim from women only. It should be the claim of men, the claim of societies, because through that we can achieve peace and economic development. Thank you very much. Rana?
Iran.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that global warming, climate change, and its effect on women and their livelihoods are of major concern to me. I'm a member of parliament.
یک دو سه یک دو سه باش من دیگه تنظیم میشم بله بله صبح که زور تقریبا اتاقامون رو دادم ساعت بکنم نزدیک 2. As per principle 50 of the Iranian Constitution, environmental security as well as confronting environmental crises remain as key plans and policies of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Islamic Republic of Iran believes achieving this objective is not possible without adoption of proper policies and decision making and political participation at minimum as half of the population.
Don't want to pay. And by so doing, they affect other people's farms, and this can create conflicts. And then we will have to be dealing with resolutions and solutions to the conflicts that arise out of this situation. Countries around.
In the name of God, as per Principle 50 of the Iranian Constitution, environmental security as well as confronting environmental crises remain as key plans and policies of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran believes that achieving this objective is not possible without adoption of proper policies in decision-making and political participation of women as half of the population who nurture the other half of Considering women's participation in decision-making, the Islamic Republic of Iran is proud to announce that with increased engagement of expert and competent women in government and decision-making bodies, the country has been able to meet its environmental needs in terms of gender equality. For instance, occupation of the position of Deputy Vice President by women for Environmental Protection Organization as a senior national decision-making authority for 4 items, allocation of a quarter of the country's environmental macro management positions to women, also women's constitution, 40% of the deputy heads of the Environment Protection Organization. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been the victim of unilateral coercive measures, which in turn pose a major threat to sustainable development. The economic sanctions not only postpone peace, sustainability, and climate resiliences, but also pose a key threat to the lives of people, including women and girls in my country. While we have gathered here to find global solutions to such crises, it's worth noting that our efforts in my country has been adversely and massively affected by the illegal actions of the United States. As a matter of fact, unfair measures can constrain the access to environmental technologies and lead to fluctuations in production, higher prices, shrinking economy, intensifying poverty and inequalities, as well as violation of human rights, which can in turn be regarded as a kind of regime against humanity.
Going a drought crisis within its arid and semi-arid areas, which has resulted into the death of livestock as well as malnutrition and starvation for most of the population. As usual, women and children are bearing the greatest brand of this drought. Madam President, the Kenyan government has put in place numerous laws to ensure that the country is in a position to fight climate change. Some of these include the implementation of Climate Change Act 2016, the Forest Conservation and Management Act 2016, energy efficiency regulations, and the creation of a national climate change action plan. Kenya also has introduced a ban on single-use plastic bags, which came into effect in 2017. Furthermore, Kenya has implemented the Kenya National Adaptation Plan 2015 to 2030 to enhance synergies between adaptation and mitigation actions in order to attain a low-carbon climate resilient economy. This notwithstanding, there are many challenges that we have faced in Kenya. These include limited funding, limited public awareness, limited access to technology that is assistive, limited insufficient data and research on this matter, and very important, insufficient research on the link between the impact of climate change on the lives of women and the consequent impacts on livelihoods in society as a whole, given that women are the de facto social security system, not just in Kenya, but in Africa. This particular challenge further creates another gap in recognizing that women must be placed at the center of all the strategies to reverse the negative impacts of climate change. Madam President, as members of parliament and senators, we have formed a climate change caucus to play our part, including initiating policy and legislative actions and amendments to improve the quality of programs that Kenya adopts.
Thank you. We have Zambia, followed by Botswana.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. The adverse effects of climate change bring about undesirable outcome, especially for women and young girls in our country. Water scarcity forces them to move long distances to fetch for water, and sometimes these women and girls are attacked, raped, in some instances killed. The Zambian parliament has utilized its legislative, oversight, budgetary, and representative function to contribute to the country's achievement of net zero emissions. However, one of the major causes of climate change in our country is deforestation caused by cutting down of trees as a source of energy in our country, in the communities that have no access to the main grid and other alternative sources of energy. This has caused internal displacement of our people, both the local and the refugees. As you know, Zambia is the home for most refugees in Africa. However, under the office of Madam Speaker, she launched the tree planting initiative in one of the constituencies. The initiative is being rolled out to all the 156 constituencies in our country. It emanated from a resolution which was adopted by the 144th IPU Assembly, which recognized the urgent need to address the climate crisis by coming up with strategies to mitigate the impacts of climate change in respective countries. At institutional level, the National Assembly of Zambia has continued to implement and support innovative practices, operations aimed at reducing gas emissions within the institution. These include the following: implementing the e-parliament concept, where the institution is promoting the use of information and communication technologies in its operations. This has involved transmitting documents electronically instead of printing. An example is the daily order paper, which is posted on the website and sent via email and WhatsApp to stakeholders, including government departments and parliamentary staff, and partnered with Zambia paper mills to collect waste paper for recycling. I submit, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you. We have Botswana, followed by Uganda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me thank the panel for the informative discussion and just share a little bit of Botswana's experience in terms of the effects of climate change on women and girls. 2019, we carried out a study to assess implications of changing climate, particularly with regards to frequent drought on women and men, current roles in households, access to and control of resources, as well as the ability to make decisions in the households and communities within the project sites. Madam Chair, the study revealed that women are more vulnerable to climate change as a result of their gender roles, which are highly focused on looking after children and other family members, while they depend solely on the subsistent agriculture to meet their family needs. Madam Chair, frequent droughts have led to poor crop harvest, which in turn have led to food insecurity and high reliance on Ipelereng, which is our government social safety net program. The patriarchal nature of Botswana society has led to restrictions on women's ability to influence decision making. Their ownership, control of land and assets are just some of the problems, including GBV, which has been exacerbated by this need. Hardship brought about by loss of livelihoods from livestock have led to some men migrating to areas in search of jobs, leaving women to deal with the impact of climate change. Some women also migrate looking for jobs, while others turn to sex work to make ends meet. The vulnerability, Madam Chair, induced by climate change and the responsibility regarding domestic care work, including looking after children, means that women more than men turn to these safety net programs. The additional burden of providing food and other necessities for the family shows that women in the project sites struggle with poverty much more than men. Madam Chair, there's limited time, but what I can say is that as a result of these findings, all sectors are encouraged to review their policies, programs, and practices to ensure that their agenda is responsive.
Can we have Uganda?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, we need to bring to attention of this House about the issues that we are facing as a country, more on issues of climate change, water insecurity. And I want to alert you that as a country, we are having the biggest challenge having it at the back of our mind that Uganda is hosting over 1.5 million refugees coming from nearby countries. The pressure is so high on climate issues and the host communities themselves. We know very well that without a host, there are no refugees. The host community is facing very high water insecurity, climate-related challenges, and this is really a very big challenge to us who come from this part of the world. We need more inclusive climate policies and also climate financing to especially most of the host communities that have been affected by these issues. The refugee is an international burden, we know this, but the responsibility is not only left to host communities, and the challenge is in issues of humanitarian and development programs that could be able to help us to curb the issue of water security and climate change related challenges is lowly funded. When we look at the current affairs, we see very well how all the funding has been diverted or taken to the war of Ukraine and Russia, the conflict. So the rest of the world is left behind with no resource envelopes to support in this kind of challenges we have caused by the refugees. And yet we know very well that once we have pressure from hosting refugees, we shall not be able to have coexistence amongst to promote peaceful coexistence and also inclusive societies in our regions. Drastic reduction in social services, food insecurity, environmental impacts, protection is so another challenge in which is building up in most of these societies. All the attention, as I've said, has been taken to other wars, and we forget that women and children are very affected in some of these conflicted areas when they come to be hosted in the host communities. So we were still advocating that let the international community take its burden, and we advocate.
Arab Parliament, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to start by expressing my pleasure of representing the Arab Parliament in the 35th session of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians, tackling a very important topic and the role of women parliamentarians in promoting gender equality when drafting policies and legislations related to water security, climate change, and sustainable peace. While the world is going through several crises, challenges, and natural disasters, we need to look in depth at the effect of these crises on gender equality. Despite a lot of achievements and successes that have been achieved in gender equality in a lot of fields and sectors, there are still challenges and problems in relation to response plans to respond to crises and emergencies. These plans are not always gender sensitive, and they often lack a real solution, especially looking at the role of women and how much they can help. In this context, we should acknowledge that women are the most affected by the challenges of the current era, mainly climate change, water insecurity, crises, and ongoing wars. They are also facing difficulties adapting to these challenges. In this context, it is noteworthy that 80% of climate refugees or migrants are women based on the UN estimates of 2022. Ladies and gentlemen,
for maternal, newborn, and child health.
Good afternoon, everybody. As the largest alliance for women's, children's, and adolescent health, we want to bring attention to the fact that has already been stated that climate change is not gender neutral. It's already making worse the vulnerability of women and girls across the world, specifically in relation to health and well-being issues. But despite the impact borne by women, children, and adolescents, women, children, and adolescent health issues are not being integrated in climate policies which lack gender and youth-targeted approaches. For example, UNFPA analysis have shown that out of 50 climate plans or nationally determined contributions, only 6 made direct reference to sexual reproductive health and rights. Many aspects of sexual reproductive health and rights are also superficially referenced in climate policies, including gender equality and participation. Few countries have more substantive and concrete gender components in nationally determined plans and contributions in national adaptation plans. What we would like to urge women parliamentarians is to help ensure that women, children, and adolescent health and well-being issues are prioritized in climate responses in the following ways. One is prioritize climate financing targeted to health and well-being for women, children, and adolescents. Increase investments in climate change and other sectors that address the social and environmental determinants of health and economic well-being that we've heard, and reduce the vulnerability that women, children, and adolescents face as a result of climate-related risks. This includes developing gender and youth-sensitive commitments and investments in multiple sectors, as has already been stated, such as education, health, water, sanitation, food insecurity. Adopt intersectional approaches that recognize multiple forms of discrimination to women, children, and adolescents, including in relation to gender and sexuality, to ensure just adaptations and resilient communities. Conduct vulnerability adaptation assessments at the population level, specifically with respect to the needs of women, children, newborn, and adolescents. Next, define targets to build climate-resilient health systems and infrastructure, including integrated monitoring systems with targeted public health messaging.
Thank you. Thank you. Finally, we have World Health Organization.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. So, the World Health Organization was heartened by last year's IPU Kigali Declaration, when parliamentarians committed to stepping up our action for gender equality. But we know that there is a huge amount of work to be done. Despite progress made on several aspects of women's health and rights, gender equality disparities remain. This hampers everyone's right to health. Conflict and nationalistic policies tend to breed patriarchy and pronatalism, increase gender inequalities, and lack of women's bodily autonomy. Gender power relations and gender norms and stereotypes affect women's and men's exposure to vulnerability to certain health risks, their health-seeking behavior, the ability to access health services, and the way that health systems respond to their health needs. The slow progress is an outcome of lack of political will and action, insufficient funding, restrictive laws and policies, harmful gender norms and health systems constraints, including insufficient integration of comprehensive sexual, reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health in national health systems. And women and girls are disproportionately, throughout their lives, affected by water scarcity, climate change, and conflicts, including through additional barriers in access to sexual and reproductive health and services, inadequate hygiene and sanitation facilities, together with harmful gender norms and practices surrounding menstruation, increased risk of abuse and gender-based violence, increased vulnerability to ill health and death during pregnancy and childbirth and for newborns, and barriers to education, working, and overall living in peace and dignity. WHO has been established to advance the right of every human being without distinction of any kind to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, as well as social well-being. We recognize the power of partnership with parliamentarians as we work to move scientific evidence into policy based on common goals to advance gender equality and health for all. We are committed to working with you to prioritize gender equality and the empowerment of women, human rights, and equity, and to ensure a constant focus on leaving no one behind. And we stand ready with the best science, evidence, and guidance when developing legislation and when holding governments to account on their promises to support evidence-based policy making for health and for gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your valuable inputs. I have a request now from Ukraine to reply to the Russian Federation's contribution. You have 1 minute, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to remind us that IPU already adopted 2 resolutions in which we condemned Russian aggression and calling to restore territorial integrity of Ukraine, calling to withdraw the military forces of Russia from Ukraine. And I call to respect all of us, each of us respect the resolutions of IPU, the decisions of IPU, and don't turn our honorable meeting to the episode of George Orwell dystopia with their lies. Thank you.
Okay, let me now turn to our panel for final words. Please, you have the floor for 2 minutes, concluding remarks. Okay. We can start from Ms. Nellen.
Thank you very much for the very rich debate from the floor. As it was well said, only so few female heads of government, only so few, less than 10% female heads of states. So really the next and important step for peace and climate protection, female MPs, I exhort you, after 16 years in Parliament myself, please become heads of states who do not engage in wars, who prevent conflicts or resolve them with comprehensive, gender-sensitive peace agreements and climate actions. Et je salue absolument la proposition française d'inviter l'UIP, plus
invite the IUP and women parliamentarians of the IUP to develop a project of resolution for feminist diplomacy, and a peace culture.
I would like to make one observation. Less than 1 year ago, we saw negotiation table in Istanbul with 100% men representation as well from the Ukraine side as from the side of Russian Federation. The secretary in the corner was a woman. Please. And then South Africa, yes. Femicides in Switzerland, the socialist women ran a strong campaign against femicide, for free abortion worldwide, and for only yes is yes. Spain is a good legislation for only yes is yes. And then I second to the Philippines and Morocco. You rightly said to include women in all decision making and to let them become agents for change. I think the Philippines are a very great example, not only because it's my second home country for having worked there 3 years for the International Commission of Jurists some time ago, but women did play a unique role in the peace negotiations, with Miriam Colonel Ferrer being the first woman chief negotiator in the world to sign in 2014 a major peace agreement after decades of war. And last point, this also provided 13 women who are now appointed in the Bangsamoro Transition Authority in the south to the parliament. Minority floor leader and attorney general are women. So thank you also to the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Haidar?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I really want to thank each and every delegation for their sharing their immense knowledge and commitment. And I want to speak more also as an individual, as a person coming from a very war-torn society that is Lebanon, that is very keen to say, don't ever opt for amnesia, always work on dealing with the past. You will never be able to get out of conflict if you choose amnesia. Unfortunately, my country is an example that has chosen amnesia and therefore is always relapsing into conflict. I wanted also to make a small comment on the issue of definitely we should not be perpetuating the image that we are victim. As I said clearly, women are not inherently vulnerable. You have such a potential, you are an illustration of this power. The most important thing is not to give up, is to create more solidarity among networks, is to be aware of good practices, is to exchange more. And I can tell you that all what I've learned about here, I hope also that we can make use of it within the CEDAW committee. I see very much the complementarity of the work done by this forum for IPU and our work in the committee, because we interact regularly with each country of yours. So your role as parliamentarian, your oversight role on your country's implementation of international convention and agreement is very important to us. It's not just that you put out the legislative framework, it's that you monitor the implementation and how these are respected within your country. And the last point on 1325, let's not forget that there are about more than a dozen of other resolutions equally important, even much more detailed, that are really a tool for implementation for all of you here who are concerned with this issue. And I think we are all concerned. And thanks again to IPU, thanks to Bahrain. It was great sharing this afternoon with all of you.
Thank you. Mr. Puto?
Thank you. As also in our theme today is about parliamentary leadership, I think I'm the only male panel here, so first thing first, I think there's a trust issue, and then I think, thank you for the trust. I think we should work together. I think it's not only the problem of women, but the problem of all human beings. So trust is very important. We can start now, we can go forward together. I think that's the first issue. The second is about respect. Respect to human, respect to nature. And as I mentioned earlier about the philosophy of Trihita Karana is very important. When you have the respect, treat nature not only as a thing, but also has a soul in it. So I think it's very important to have respect, not only for other human, but also for nature. And also we know that we have to be blessed, and also for sure we have been blessed with our Creator, and that's very important. And one thing also, the most important is the commitment together. We can start now, we could work together. I think I'm very lucky here. If I'm not being trusted by all the women, probably I will not be here. But let me assure from me that I think we should work together, male and female. I mean, to find peace, to achieve sustainable peace, to preserve water, food, and also energy. I think is very important, and also to mitigate climate change. I think all this issue, I think it's not the problem of women, but all human beings. And living in harmony is the key to all what we have to do to go forward. I think unity in diversity, its richness, and harmony is very important to work together to the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, colleagues, and the audience. It has been a wonderful experience being in this panel, and thank you all for all your interventions. I think it has been a very important forum for us to discuss the issues affecting women and girls in the context of the climate change and other disasters. Listening to most of the speakers, I think a lot has been done in terms of policies and legal framework to address the issues that are on the table today. And I think the problem we have is the implementation of these legal provisions and the policies, and also the issue of funding to implement some of the national action plans related to climate change management and mitigation of the impact, especially on girls and women. I want to quote again what the colleague from Netherlands said, that politics, a quote from one of the female leaders from the Netherlands, that politics is too important to be left to men alone. Therefore, women and men should participate in politics, because politics is where decisions are made, it is where resources are distributed. Therefore, the presence of women in politics is very important. And that is the very strong message, a good lesson that I've learned and I've heard from one of the female leaders. I would like also to congratulate the 6 countries that have achieved gender parity, 50-50 or slightly above 50, like Rwanda. I can see we are still far behind. Most of the countries are still far behind, but I believe one day we'll get there. And we need to be consistent with our common and collective voices to ensure that we reach gender parity. No matter how long it takes, we will get there. Thank you very much. Let's remain committed and be in solidarity with each other and learn the good lessons and experiences from each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Triggs.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all. It's been a great privilege for me to be here to listen to your approaches and understanding of the plight of women as a consequence of climate change, lack of access to water, conflict. And listening to you, I've learned a lot, but I'm also very aware of the need of the energy that's in the room, the information and the goodwill to try to find solutions. And I think that it would be very important to come away from this meeting with some action plans, for some ideas to take all this energy and do something with it that's going to achieve the outcomes. And it's obviously not for me to tell the IPU quite how they would go about this, but I think that the key point that most of you have made is that members of parliament, when they have that position of influence and power, can be very effective in changing laws and developing policies. The more women in those positions, of course, the better it's going to be. But we already have a lot of rather marvelous women in these positions. Let us see what IPU can do through its leadership, working with other organizations, including my own and the UN, and to see if we can get an action plan on this issue that could take things forward, to take us to some solutions. I completely agree with my colleague, the speaker from South Sudan. This is the time for implementation. we have the laws, we have the policies in many cases, but we have not been able to give realistic action to the role of women in responding to climate change or preparing for it. I do have a question, and I'll try and pursue it outside, but one of the things that I spoke about earlier is the importance of financial mechanisms to ensure that women are able to achieve livelihoods, to protect themselves, to be engaged more meaningfully in society, and to be self-sufficient. But one of you has mentioned that it was difficult for access to the World Bank funding. And I would really like to explore that, because I do think that one of the ways forward is to be better engaged with the international financial mechanisms. And if that's not working, and women in the poorer segments are not able to have access to it, then it's time we spoke to the World Bank and the regional banks to make sure that they have got access to that funding. So thank you all. I really think it's been a privilege, and I very much look forward to seeing what we can do from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear panelists and colleagues, for all your contributions. I believe that we will leave this forum with a wealth of new ideas of what we can do in our respective countries with regard to the climate change and all its effects on us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You did
It was a pleasure.
Great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. It's not easy to sit here.
It's not.